Good morning, everyone. We'll be starting in just a moment, giving a quick second for folks to come into the room. Okay. Good morning, good morning. We'll be starting in just a second.
Oh, we might reach 200.
Here we go. Good morning. We'll start in about 1 minute. We're almost ready. Okay.
All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Stephanie Spann. I'm the Associate Director for the UC San Diego OSHA Training Institute Education Center. This event is a continuation of our collaboration for the Region 9 OTIECs. Our goal is to provide the communities of Arizona, California, Guam, Hawaii, Nevada, and the Pacific Island territories with opportunities to support OSHA's mission, to ensure safe and healthful working conditions for workers by setting and enforcing standards and by providing training, outreach, education, and assistance. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Stephanie. My name is Nisa Bart Thompson. I'm the social media specialist for the College of Extended and International Education here at California State University, Dominguez Hills. And before we jump in, I'd just like to quickly review the Zoom controls. So this is a webinar format, and we are presenting this online with just a simple webinar format. There's no need to worry about turning on your camera or your microphone. However, we would like for you to participate in today's session. So please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you are joining us from the Zoom desktop app or web browser, or in the top right screen if you are on a mobile device. Please ask your questions in the Q&A panel rather than in the chat panel. In that chat panel, we're going to be using that to carry on conversation and provide helpful links and so on. Once you click that Q&A button, a dialog box will open, allowing you to type your question. And all of our team members here are here to assist you and answer questions or comments along the way, but we really want to have those questions in that Q&A panel. And you'll find that probably during the course of the session, some of your questions may be answered with our presenter. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Raul to introduce.
Thank you, Anissa. So our presenter, Nick Glider, is the area manager for the Cal OSHA Consultation Office branch in Oakland, California. He is the former enforcement district manager and industrial hygienist. In his last 23 years with Cal OSHA, he has personally investigated hundreds of serious illnesses and injuries in workplaces, ranging from agriculture to construction to general industry, and has overseen thousands of inspections and consultations. In his current role in the consultation office, he and his consultants help employers become compliant with California's occupational safety and health regulations, develop a safety culture, and reduce costly injuries and illnesses. So welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Raul. We are going to be talking today about 5141.1 protection from wildfire smoke for employees. Cal OSHA regulations are always developing over time. When a need arises, then especially with outdoor workers being of concern for heat or for smoke, This new regulation was temporarily put in effect in 2019 and was made permanent February of this year. So what I'm going to do through this presentation is go through the regulation, what's necessary for you to know in the regulation, and how to basically take this information and bring it to your employees so they understand the regulations and so everyone is compliant with Title VIII. Next slide. So I remember where I was the day of the first fire, the campfire. I remember it was a beautiful day and it was blue skies. And then I came out of the building about 11 a.m. and it was smoky. I'm like, there's fire someplace. And I really couldn't find the source of it until later the next day when I heard about the raging fires in Central California up in the north. And the smoke just blew down and basically stayed with us for over a week. And this demanded, because this is an unusual situation where usually we're trying to protect employees from chemicals and things indoors and trying to bring in fresh air from the outside. And in this case, we have the opposite problem, is that the outside air is contaminated and we're trying to protect people from that. And so that makes it a really tough job. So these emergency regulations were developed. There was a lot of dangers from wildfire smoke. And mostly it's health effects. I mean, you don't want to be burned by a fire, but the fire smoke spreads far and wide, as we all know, and can create either cause health effects or exacerbate pre-existing conditions. Next slide. So the applicability of this regulation is any workplace or operation where the AQI, which is the air quality index, is over 150 or 151 and greater. And so, and the lawyers actually put it in, put in there, it's any place that's reasonably anticipate employee exposure, which means outside or any gradation thereof. But ultimately, who decides would be like an administrative law judge. So say if you did get cited for not being in compliance with the smoke regulations, that would be the point where if you wanted to contest the citations, you would take that in front of an administrative law judge and work it out with enforcement in front of the judge, and they can make the decision from there. So there's no hard and fast rule, but if you think you can reasonably anticipate employee exposure, then you should be in compliance with this regulation. Next slide. So exceptions, which are huge. So buildings with filtered mechanical ventilation, doors, windows that remain closed. I was called by my son's school because they were like, what do we do? How do we deal with this situation where the outside air is not good? And how do we deal with it? So I ended up going on the internet and figuring it out myself of what's in the air and what's required for HVAC systems to be operating. And when I was an inspector, a decade or two ago, I used to go every place of employment I would request the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning records. So an employer is required to operate their HVAC system continuously while the workplace is in operation. So that's a given right there. It has to be operating, and there's extenuating circumstances for that, but generally that's true. And you need to do annual maintenance and inspection of the HVAC system. So, and that has to be in writing. So whenever I did an inspection, I would request the HVAC record. So I say any fixed points of employment, and you have a building with internal ventilation, you should make sure that ventilation system is up to snuff, because when the fire happens, it's too late. You want to make sure that is working correctly, and you'll learn all about minimum efficiency rating values on your filters. So, and that's what I learned about. Vehicles are also exempt.
So Nick?
Yes.
We have a quick question. Actually, there's two. But the Sean Forrest has a question. Will this exemption include all first responders?
Okay, instead of firefighters engaged in wildland firefighting. I don't think so. I think the exception is specifically to firefighters engaged in wildland firefighting. Other first responders should be, and I'm going to get into this later, but basically there's a reasonable anticipation that if you're a first responder, that you might be exposed at the AQI over 500. And so those people should be enrolled in a respiratory protection program where they have medical surveillance, they're fit tested, and they have respirators that are going to protect them when the AQI is over 500. Was there another question?
David Hodge says, is this speaking of inhalation routes or does it include absorption? I know you're going to deal with this, address it a little bit later in the presentation. So I'm not sure if you want to wait, David, or if you want to address that now, Nick.
Well, I think absorption is not a major route of exposure, especially with particulate, which we're mostly talking about. But I'll get into all the constituents of the smoke itself later.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So the vehicles, they're exempt if they're a filtered cabin air. And if the employer can prove that the AQI where the employees are is under 151, that's exempted too. And if they're only going out for 1 hour of exposure, then that's exempted. But you want to make sure that they're not overexposed and that they're not going over. And then there's the firefighters engaged in wildland firefighting. You would have to go to, basically that's the exemption. And as far as emergency crews, I think everyone should have, like if you're on a medical emergency crew or you're on a utility emergency crew, I think the employer should keep in mind that wildfires can happen and they can be called into action. So these people should be enrolled in a full respiratory protection program. Next slide. So what is required? Basically, the AQI and keeping tabs on what's really going on in the air is very important. And you need to check beginning and periodically through the shift because it does change radically. As with the first campfire and sitting in Oakland, it was an hour or two before basically Oakland was socked in. Went from clear skies and breathable air to smoky. And communicating the employees is very important, both ways, not just the employer talking down to the employee, but the employee being able to speak to the employer and telling them about changing smoke conditions or tell them about their health conditions and see how and if they're doing well. How to reduce employee exposure, you bring them indoors or providing N95s and providing voluntary use respirators over AQI of 151. If it's over 500, they are mandatory, they're required. And so if you're going to put your employees, like say, an emergency response crew, and they have to get the job done, lives are at risk, they should be previously enrolled in a respiratory protection program and have a fit tested HEPA cartridge respirator ready to go, or N95 ready to go in the case of this emergency, because when it happens, it's too late. Next slide. So as far as identifying the harmful exposures, the AQI is very important. Everyone pretty much has a smartphone now. Most people. But I have Air Now on I have the Air Now app on my smartphone. So I can just bring it right up and look at my AQI wherever I am if you turn on location services. But there's a number of different websites you can use to monitor the situation, monitor where your employees are, so you can keep really in close contact with what is really going on in the air. And as far as who has it, I think it's useful for the supervisor to have it, but also the employees, so they can keep tabs, especially if they're field employees and they're out there. They need to be able to monitor it themselves. Next slide. So these are the AQI index numerical values that have been assigned. And there's nothing, sharp or delineated about this, but if you I mean, this is what it says, and so this is what the law is. And at 151 AQI, you need to offer your employees respiratory protection, usually N95s. And then it goes up from there. And so it gets 151, 150 is the limit, and that's when everything kicks into effect. But you need to be monitoring as you go along. Yes, Carrie.
So related to this slide, Rob Conley asks, are filtered buildings still exempt if the indoor AQI is above 151 for greater than 1 hour?
I never heard of such a situation, but I would, if the air AQI inside a building, I don't know how you'd measure that. If you might have your own meter that measures, PM 2.5, which is 2.5 micron size and below, I would think, yeah, you would, if the AQI is 151 inside the building because the filtration mechanism isn't working well, then that would kick in, that you would go back to the first slide of the applicability or where we would reasonably anticipate. But if we know, and you have a meter that is calibrated and it tells you that the AQI is over 151, well, then that's not reasonably anticipated, then it's over 151 and remedial action should be taken.
Thank you. Now we do have another question here. This is from an anonymous attendee. When the standard was adopted, there was a public comment regarding the requirement for fit testing when an employer mandates the use of respirators.
Yeah.
This could be very problematic if the majority of your employees work outside and must work outside. Is OSHA going to cite employers if they require the use of respirators due to AQI, but they have not fit tested their employees?
Well, that only kicks in at 500 AQI. So at 151 AQI, it's required of the employer to make them available, and it's up to the employee to use the respirator or not. That's
Okay.
the big difference. But when it hits 500, then it's required to put them in respiratory protection, but that kicks in the respiratory protection program with fit testing and medical surveillance.
Perfect.
Okay.
And then let's see, Kevin Esther just posted something in our Q&A. Can you confirm that the employer is solely responsible to monitor, not the employee? Our folks work outside throughout 2 counties. Thank you. And that's from Kevin.
Well, I think both should be. The supervisor back in the hermetically sealed office maybe should be looking at what's going on in the 2 counties to have a general idea, but definitely the employees, and I'll get later into that too, how to assure what the AQI is. It's best to have the employees themselves be able to access the Air Now website or have an app on their phone so they can look at their specific area and what they're being exposed to.
And then we're getting some questions regarding fit testing. So I know you're going to deal with that a little bit farther into the presentation, address it. So I'm going to go ahead and hold off on those. But when we get to
I'll
that
get
space, there's a lot of questions on that.
I have definite, opinions on fit testing. Okay, so next slide. So communication is crucial in this regulation, and it goes up and down. So you want not only to be, talking to the employees, but the employees talking to you and letting you know what's going on. You have to let them know, you need we talked about the monitoring the AQI, but also available protective measures, and that could be bringing them into a building for a period of time, cars, respiratory protection, reduced work. And also encourage employees. It's kind of interesting that we have to encourage employees, but because there's a power dynamic between the employer and the employee. So the employer has to make it acceptable that the employee and welcome the reports of worsening air quality or welcome the report if they're having adverse symptoms from the smoke. And update on the worsening air quality, and it could be visually too, so people, if you can see the smoke in the air, and you want to be able to, also be a trigger to let people know what the AQI, they should check it possibly if they see it getting worse. So reducing exposure, there's a number of different ways: relocating into structures that have filtered air, change procedures, so moving to better air, maybe not working in an area that's look like this picture, very smoky, reducing time in exposed air and increased rest time. And those things are kind of like the heat standard, because though you're outside too, you want to put people in the shade, you want them to rest, and you want them to get them out of the sun. And this is kind of similar, where you are getting them out of the smoke and let their body recoup so they can keep, so they stay healthy and their body isn't overwhelmed. And reducing the physical intensity of work. Another idea to just reduce the metabolic load on their body, because the smoke and possibly wearing a respirator takes quite a taxing effect on the body. So health effects. The way you need to train your employees is in Appendix B of the standard. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail when I talk about the health effects, because I think it's more important that you know specifically why respiratory protection is necessary. And because people, I'll just put on a scarf. No, there's a real reason why N95s and real respirators are necessary to protect you from smoke. You need to actually train them the right to obtain medical treatment without fear of reprisal, because a lot of workers will say, I don't want to be a burden, and they will not bring it up. So you want them to bring it up. And how to obtain the AQI, either through the app or you reporting it to them, and the requirements, the methods to protect, the limitations, and the benefits of the respirators. And I will get into that in more detail later on. And the donning, use, and maintenance of respirators. Because if you don't don it and use it properly, it can cause even more of a hazard, or you have a false sense of security. So you're going around, sucking down a lot of smoke and thinking you're being protected, and then suffering adverse effects later. Health effects. So, particulate matter, it's irritating. There's all sorts of nasty toxins in it. Wheezing. I mean, I was a kid growing up in Los Angeles in the 1970s, and we used to have third stage smog alerts. And I remember running around at recess and getting back to class and going, and go, that's not good, because of breathing this Los Angeles smog in that decade. So it's a real thing. And if you're not a young kid, that wheezing could be a lot more serious, especially if you're elderly. And even my son was exposed. When the beginning of the fires, they kept all the kids inside, and I went to go pick them up, and I go, well, where is he? And they're like, oh, the kids were bouncing off the walls, and we had to take 2 of them out to the jungle gym so they could play Tarzan for 15 minutes. And I was like, okay. And I went out there and I got him, and everything was fine. I'm like, oh, I hope he wasn't out here too long playing around. And the next morning, he had flu-like symptoms. I'm like, is he sick? And it went away in a day, but it let me know that he was probably overexposed, in that 15 minutes of running around outside. It made him sick the next day. So these things can happen. And, what do you do though? Your kids are bouncing off the wall and you have to get them outside. Anyhow, next slide.
Nick, David wants to know, when dealing with wildfire smoke on outside jobs, what if the AQI is just below the 151 mark, but the particulate count is above the acceptable limits, according to some of the air quality websites?
You can get the particulate we're talking about is PM 2.5, which is 2.5 microns in size, which is actually quite big, considering the size of smoke itself. It all depends. I mean, the applicability of the regulation is like, can you reasonably anticipate exposure? And are you going to feel comfortable going in front of an administrative law judge and saying, well, the AQI on my app on my phone back at the home office said 149. And so I didn't bother to provide them with N95s, and then an enforcement officer opened up an inspection. And I think, you know, that's going to be a hard sell, I think, if you're trying to push the limit, because what we're going here, you probably want to comply with the spirit of the law and not the letter of the law. If you want to, you know, and also you want to protect your employees. So there is no, you know, there's no magical number of at 149 to 150, 151. It's that much worse, and that the respirator is going to save the day. It might be much more, it might be useful at below 151. So, but that the law doesn't say is required until then. So personally, I wouldn't try to play the lines.
Yeah, definitely. I like the spirit of the law. It's what we need to look for.
You get some leeway, you know, especially if you want to contest your citations in front of an administrative law judge. You want to be on firm ground, and you know, when it's close to the edge on the 151, not so firm there.
Thank you, Nick. Steve also asks, why wasn't PM10 taken into consideration, even though it's a pollutant of concern per EPA, and actively monitored along with PM 2.5 as an AQI parameter? I'm assuming that, okay.
Yeah, that's a question for the standards board. They answer the why of all this, and you know, and I don't know. We have to do some research on that. Any others?
Thank you.
Thanks for the questions, by the way. Okay, so I'm going to get a little more detailed now because I'm an industrial hygienist and I like knowing what's in the toxins that we're breathing, not just general wildfire smoke, but like what are the toxins and what do they do to your body? And the biggest one, especially if you're close to the fire or, you know, is carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is a chemical asphyxiant. That means it doesn't displace the oxygen in your lungs, but it displaces the oxygen in your blood. And it binds to your carboxyhemoglobin 200 times stronger than regular oxygen. That's why people that are exposed to carbon monoxide, they might be removed from the exposure of carbon monoxide, but the carbon monoxide has built up so much in their blood that their body starts dying anyhow, and you can't get oxygen in there because the carbon monoxide is much more stronger at binding the carboxyhemoglobin, which feeds your body and keeps you alive. So carbon monoxide is a wicked one, and you got to watch out for that. Like in fires and things like this happen, sometimes people break out the generators, like because they turn off the power, and people with generators indoors, and those generators can give off carbon monoxide. So you got to keep the generators outdoors. So that's just a side note that I was reading through things that happen in these type of events. People start using generators, and that's a carbon monoxide is also a threat using those. There's nitrogen dioxide. This basically just impairs the lung response to biologicals, you know, and we know those, and chemicals. Ozone is an oxidizer, irritant, causes free radical reactions, you know, starts plucking electrons from all your other cells in your body and just does a lot of damage. The particulate matter, what's in there is a variety of toxins. So we really, you know, don't know, but they can all have their own unique effects. Acrolein, benzene, everyone knows benzene as like the super solvent of yesteryear, but now we know this, you know, chain of carbon atoms causes cancer, specifically with the blood too. So benzene, I was surprised to find out that actually comes from wildfire smoke. And I was like, oh, it's interesting. And formaldehyde, technically it's a suspect carcinogen, I think right now, suspect human carcinogen, but for the sake of this, I'd say, let's just call it a carcinogen and to protect yourself from it. As far as the health effects with structural smoke, because we call this a wildfire smoke regulation, but ultimately it's just not trees that burn and brush. Houses burn, cars burn, all sorts of things burn, and they give off a whole host of other chemicals like hydrogen cyanide, which kind of like carbon monoxide, displaces the oxygen, so you can't respire, but hydrogen cyanide blocks cellular respiration. It does pretty much the same thing. Hydrochloric acid, of course, is corrosive. Phosgene damages your lungs. Metal oxide, there's a whole wide variety of those that can do damage and in different effects to your body. Toluene, styrene, and dioxin, all CNS depression, which is central nervous system depression. Toluene, male reproductive effects. Styrene affects your heart, so you can have cardiac arrhythmia, and you get it in your body. And the reason most of these chemicals cause liver and kidney damage is because to get rid of these chemicals out of your body, it goes either to your kidneys to be polarized, or it goes to your liver to be conjugated, and it does all sorts of, basically you're making your liver and kidneys do work overtime to get these toxins out of your body. So that's why it does significant damage there. And dioxin also causes central nervous system depression, and it is also a carcinogen, a potent one. So all of these things I am mentioning, this is not in the regulation, but I think it's important to understand why we want to protect ourselves from wildfire smoke. And these are the reasons why, as motivation to your employees to wear a respirator properly, to pay attention to AQI. And cardiopulmonary mortality is a huge one, especially you have pre-existing conditions like asthma, which is an obstructive disorder, same with COPD, and myocardial infarction is straight up a heart attack. So stroke, that's in the brain, and arrhythmia. So that's the fluctuating heartbeat, irregular heartbeat. Next one. And so the danger really is overwhelming the heart and lungs. Your body is pretty resilient. It depends on your overall health, but it fights for you. But once it gets overwhelmed, then a whole cascade of things happen. So you want to keep in mind that the effects of cardiac effects and the risk of respiratory infection. So nitrogen dioxide, ozone, PM 2.5, they will worsen viral proliferation. So it's going to worsen, either flu or SARS-CoV-2. So that's a bad combination of smoke and SARS-CoV-2 exposure, and worsening of bacterial infection too. So back in the influenza pandemic of 1918, people got the flu and it made them sick, but ultimately what killed them was bacterial infection too. So these things work together, like the organism is weakened. So you want to protect from all these different things so they don't all come together and create a cascade of problems. And so the mechanisms, go back. The mechanisms, impaired ciliary function. So when you get phlegm and you're coughing stuff up, that is that's the natural function of expelling toxins. So you don't want to overwhelm that. Oxidative stress, I think people have heard about that, and that's the free radical production inside your body. And your body has natural mechanisms to fight free radical production, like glutathione, and there's a whole bunch of them. And there's a whole bunch of oxidizers too. But if the oxidizers start winning, that's when it really starts damaging your body. And the last mechanism is it reduces the ability of macrophages, which is they go around and they find invaders and they chomp on them. And so if those if they're impaired, basically they're not going to be able to do their jobs when some kind of foreign invader like a SARS-CoV-2 or some kind of bacterial infections invades the body. So medical treatment and AQI, medical treatment needs to be provided without fear of reprisal. And this is the hard part to get across to employees, is that they need to feel comfortable coming to their employer saying, I'm not feeling well, and evacuating themselves to a medical treatment. And that should be agreed upon. Who's your medical provider in the area that they're in, so they can get prompt treatment. And employees also need to be told how to access the AQI, or be told. But like I said before, and someone asked this, is the how-to is probably a lot better than you actually providing it to them. You know, you want both, basically. You want the supervisor to be able to check, or someone remotely to have a general idea of what the AQI is, where their employees are, but you also want the employees to be able to look for themselves. Okay, respiratory use. So basically, once it hits 151, it has to be a respiratory protection has to be offered to the employee. You know, clean, right fit, NIOSH certified. And for NIOSH certified, everyone knows about KN95s, and KN95s are not NIOSH certified, except for one. I actually did a study where they fit tested me with like 13 different KN95s. Two of them, one of them was NIOSH certified, or two of them were, and they actually fit. And you could tell it was a respirator because it's the, oh, I got one right here. It has the two straps that go behind the head. So this will go behind the head and this one goes behind the neck. But if it's ear loops, every respirator that I did quantitative fit testing with the ear loops failed because it doesn't seal to the face well. And just so you know, there's a wide variety of respirators, respirator quality and functionality. And it really comes down to the higher quality ones work better, are more comfortable, and that should guide your decision-making when you buy respirators and get actual N95s. And and this goes with no scarves or surgery. Yeah, Carrie.
All right, so you have a lot of questions about respirator use.
We haven't even started yet.
Do you want to address them now or take a couple?
Yeah, let's go through it. Let's see.
Okay, so let's see here. You go back, I was saving these. Anonymous attendee says, so basically you have to fit test all of your employees who may work outside. That's,
no, there's no,
not a question. This is very onerous and costly. Not a question, more of a statement. Is this correct?
No, there's no fit test requirement. The only requirement for this in this regulation, if it goes over the AQA goes over 500 and it's mandatory, you got to put them in a respirator. Then you got to fit test them. Then you got to get them medically cleared. But at this point, at 151, you need to offer them the NIOSH approved N95 at least, and that's it. So there's no fit testing required. There are recommendations, but no requirement.
Okay. And it looks like Raul has been answering some questions, the ones that I was saving. But if anyone else, let's see, Andrew had a question about the N95, but I don't see the original question. The AQI, yeah. So the same anonymous person, attendee who just asked that question about the requirements for everyone just said, yes, but the AQI could exceed 500 at any time.
Well, then and if the AQA exceeds 500, you better pull your people out of the field.
Yeah.
And get them into shelter so they're protected, because that's like pea soup. That's really thick.
Well, we seemed like we had that last year. It was terrible.
And it got up there. Yeah. I mean, it ranged quite a bit in Oakland.
Yeah.
You know, little micro environments.
Yes. Esther asked, can you elaborate a little on the Appendix D for voluntary use on N95 masks if the air quality is less than 151 for employees who may have a pre-existing medical condition and prefer to wear a respirator? Do you need me to repeat that?
Yeah, well, she's asking about the respiratory protection standard, which there's what they call the Appendix D. So if you're an employer and an employer wants a respirator and it's not, you're doing it voluntarily, you can give them that respirator, but you could also have to give them the Appendix D, which you just print it out and it's a notification to the employee of the hazards associated with wearing a respirator, you know, and there's a whole bunch of issues. So, but that's in a separate section, that's in a different part, and that's in the respiratory protection standard, which is not what we're talking about today. I might refer to it, but you know, and at 500, if you're going to put people in respirators after 500, then they have to be enrolled in a respiratory protection program.
And then Sherry asks, even though they don't need to be fit tested, don't they still need to have a medical clearance?
No, but I'll get into that too.
Okay,
There's recommendations for that.
okay, perfect. So that's Sherry Chan will be addressing that. Let's see here. Chris Ryan says we're experiencing extreme difficulty locating the N95s. We are typically only able to locate KN95s, as N95s are still allocated for EMS purposes. Is that still
Not
okay?
From what I've heard, I mean, I think we're gonna post in the chat or in the Q&A the list of vendors. I mean, if you go to our website, there's 35 different vendors you can go to, and they all
Yes.
have N95s. There shouldn't be a shortage anymore. I mean, even in the thick of COVID and everything, and everyone's snatching up N95s, I went out and bought a half-face elastomeric respirator with HEPA cartridges, which is even better. But no one was buying those. Everyone was buying the, you know, the disposable ones. So,
Yeah.
but they are out there. N95s are out there now, and I say buy them now, so you have them ready when the fires hit, because you don't want to be panic buying with everybody else.
Absolutely. Andrew also asked, how effective is the N95 if you have a beard? Respirators are more effective when clean shaven.
Yes. So I've actually practiced with this. I mean, I have during the thick of COVID, whenever I went indoors, I would wear this respirator, and this is my personal half-face elastomeric respirator with, you know, the magenta HEPA cartridges, high efficiency particulate air cartridges, and I would kind of get a feel for how much stubble and how much leakage I would have. And what I have right now is too much. Like I would pretty much nullify the effect of a respirator with this kind of beard that I have on me right now. The air would come right through here, and the PM 2.5 would just go right in, and I wouldn't be protected very well. But if it's really, you know, I tried different stubble, you know, I think you get a better seal with elastomeric because, you know, you get a little moisture seal too. With the N95, you don't have any rubber gasket or anything. So I think these are much more sensitive to any kind of facial beard stuff. So if I was like, if it was really bad, the AQI was really bad right now, I would definitely shave and be clean shaven and wear my respiratory protection. Actually, I'd wear my elastomeric and not even N95 because it's better. But yes, that's actually true. The beard is going to severely impair the performance of your respirator.
Yeah, definitely.
Nick?
And then Timo asks, what are the mandatory Cal OSHA safety orders or standards for AQI, and where can they find them?
They're right in the regulation. You can, you know, you can go to our website, the Cal OSHA website, and look up Title 8 and go right into 5141.1, and it'll be right in there.
And just a reminder that I'll be dropping a PDF copy of the presentation into the chat the closer we get to the end of the presentation. And then I'm not sure, Loretta, I'm not sure about this question. Is an App D signature required annually?
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is either. So if you wanted to give me a little bit more information on that, then I could bring that up.
Harry?
Yarrow?
Hey, Nick, just wanted to go back to the previous comment that you made. So just wanted to add that all the instructions that I've seen for manufacturers of respirators, they all indicate no facial hair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you shouldn't have any facial hair. I just used my reference of like I had stubble and I was trying to see, you know, if I felt any leakage, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you should be clean shaven, without a doubt.
Christine asks, is an N95 filtering phase mask sufficient enough for 500 AQI or higher? If not, what I'm hearing is that employees should not be working in the field if the AQI is 500 or above.
Well, it depends on the assigned protection factor of the respirator. So, you know, at a higher AQI, you might need this kind of half face elastomeric with the cartridges, or a full face. People might think you're a little crazy, but I'll get into that later. I'll talk about a bit more about the respirators.
Okay.
Ultimately, you want to have there's a wide variety of respirators, and you want to get ones that fit the face of your employees well and have good comfort. Because I've tried on these different ones, and some of them suck in and they're very uncomfortable because they touch your face. They're low quality. You know, they're hard to put on. They're fold out. They're really cheaply made. So you would, you know, well, actually, I'm talking about KN95s. Basically, N95s. There are different ones, but you definitely want to get a good quality of N95 too, and any other NIOSH approved respirator.
So Steve is asking, what is the max use concentration rating for the N95 when working in environments with AQI of 500 and above, if the assigned protection factor for the N95 is only 10?
Right. So that's I need a calculator. Basically, you should get an industrial hygienist and figure out what the assigned protection factor and what's required for your organization. So for Cal OSHA itself, we assign a lower protection factor for certain respirators. So an N95 wouldn't be enough for us at going out at 500. So that can get very long and involved, and you're gonna have to, you know, figure it out and break out what the assigned protection factor is and how much is it going to reduce. I mean, that's a class unto itself, just so you know.
So that would actually be a really good opportunity for someone to reach out to Cal OSHA consultation to work this out with them, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It looks like we only have like 13 minutes left, and I got a couple more.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead.
Let's hold off on the questions, and I'll
Okay.
go through this. Next one. So instructions for medical evaluation, fit testing, and shaving should be followed. So in the regulation says should and not shall. So if it's respiratory protection program, it's shall be followed. You shall get a medical evaluation and fit testing, and shaving is mandatory. You can't force people to shave though, you know, with this regulation. And they should be designed for particulates, not, you know, I've seen people with the half face elastomerics, and they have the organic cartridges on there, and which might be fine for protecting from the benzene that might be in the air, but it's not going to do much for you for like the whole host of other particulate that are in the air. They must keep track of their own respirator, keep it clean, informed on how to keep it, you know, in good maintenance. And employees with heart and lung problems should consult a doctor before use. And that's what the medical surveillance is all about, because people are not all the same. Some people have restrictive lung disorders like silicosis, or obstructive disorders like asthma. And when you breathe through a respirator, it takes pleural pressure to pull that air through the filter. And then exhaling, if you have to, usually an exhale is like you're relaxing, but if you have to push it through a respirator or through a exhalation valve, that takes intrathoracic pressure. So when that happens, you know, it basically, your heart doesn't fill as much with blood, and it increases the whole thing. You got to do more work because you're working to pull the air and push the air through the filter. And then there's ultimately the dead air space in the respirator itself, because when you exhale, the air goes out, most of it, but then there's still just a little bit of volume there that you're going to re-inhale your own carbon dioxide. And that takes a little bit more taxing on your system. So those all should be taken into account of why just putting a respirator on your face is needs to be taken into consideration. And that's why when it's a respiratory protection program, this is all mandatory. And I've had I am under a medical surveillance right now, and I had, you know, do a spirometric exam, and I filled out a, you know, multi-page questionnaire to make sure that I was medically fit to wear a respirator, because it takes work. And if you have any pre-existing conditions, it can exacerbate those problems. Next one. So This is the minimum, the N95, the classic N95, but you can also wear a more protective respirator like the half-face elastomeric with the magenta HEPA cartridges, or a full face, which gives you more protection. Personally, the best is the powered air purifying respirator, which actually pumps the air into your mask for you. So you don't have to expend all that effort of sucking the air through a filter. You have a little fan that does that for you. And I used to wear one for when I did asbestos, go into asbestos containments, and it's all filled with asbestos dust. And it's wearing away. But if you wear that on the street, people might think you're strange. So I don't see many people wearing those. As far as inadequate, like, basically, if you think that basically smoke is not going to be filtered by a surgical mask or a face mask or a bandana or a gaiter. It's like, trying to keep bees out of your yard with a chain link fence. They just go right through. The scale of the size of the particles are really kind of almost beyond our imagination because we can't see them. And then there's scales, there's things that are so small we can't see. And then there's things that are a lot smaller than that. And they have different physiological effects on the body. And the insidious thing is that the smaller the particle, the less likely it's going to be caught in your upper airway and expelled through phlegm and things like that. It's going to get way down into your alveoli where the oxygen is exchanged with the blood and get into your blood system and wreak all sorts of havoc. So that's the big concern there. Next one. Facial hair, here we are. Yeah, it'll be much less protective. You should be clean shaven on this regulation. You can't force anyone to shave. It's voluntary until you get to 500, and then they got to shave if it's a man. And it depends on kind of respirator too, but ultimately, yeah, no, the hair will be the problem. Yes, Carrie.
Okay, so back to the questions here. A few about just wanting some clarification on the facial hair issue. So let's see here. I'll start with Estabana. When a person has facial hair and they want to wear an N95, does the employer provide it to them even though they will not be well protected?
Yes. If at 151, they have to make that available to them, and if they want to wear it, but as an employer, you should inform them, as we're doing right now, that facial hair will hurt the performance of the respirator, and basically all the air will flow between the seal, right where the hair is, and go right into your mouth and lungs. So you need to inform the employee that basically they're nullifying the effectiveness of the respirator.
I think that would actually answer this question as well, but Anonymous is asking, then what would you recommend if employees refuse to be clean shaven?
Well, if they want, I mean, basically the respiratory protection has to be offered to them at 151. And what was the second part of the question? Like,
what if they they refuse to be clean shaven? Is there any recommendations that you would have on addressing that?
Just inform them that they're not being protected at all. That that's it. I mean, they could be wearing the respirator, and I when the first fire started, I saw people wearing masks, and I wanted to stop them on the streets, saying, that's not helping you, but it made them feel better. So, you just, and maybe there's something to that also. People, psychologically feel better but ultimately, if you want to protect your lungs and filter these things out, these HEPA filtering mechanisms, melt blown, polyethylene is the way to go, because it basically allows the best flow possible through the filter medium while filtering out 99.97% of the particles that are at 0.3 microns. So go to the next slide, because that's right on there.
Okay.
Okay, anyhow. So that's the thing with the, there we go. Go back, oh no, too far. One more. There we go. So one more forward, please. Okay, and so basically the particulates will mostly be taken out. You know, it's not going to get it all because some of these particles are going to be smaller, but hopefully the electrostatic charge on the HEPA filter is going to grab even the particles smaller. So, but that's why you shouldn't be exercising. Even with a respirator, you shouldn't be outside exercising and increasing your respiration rate. And you got to also realize that you're not being protected with the HEPA cartridges, you're not being, or HEPA filter on the N95, you're not being protected by gases and other vapors like formaldehyde and acrolein. I mean, theoretically, you could stack your cartridges. You can get a half face elastomeric like this one and have, you know, magenta HEPA cartridges and organic vapor and acid gas, but that's still not even a guarantee that you're going to get it all. But, you know, and I've never seen that.
So
Okay,
Nick, Esther's asking, she says, correct me if I'm wrong, but the PAPR doesn't require clean shaving.
Depends. If it's a PAPR, powered air purifying respirator, and it's a full face, I would have to be clean shaven, so I'd have a seal. There's different kinds of PAPRs. There's the hood PAPR, so you can put this huge hood over your head, and it basically supplies air and provides really good protection, but it's bulky. And if you can afford it, go for it. I mean, I love the powered air purifying respirator. I wore one for years going inside toxic containments, and I always felt, you know, protected. So
Anonymous asks, should they have an employee sign something to prevent a citation to the company if the employee refuses to be clean shaven?
Well, there's no requirement for being clean shaven. I mean, you should document your training though. So you should document your training, that you trained them on this regulation and all the, how to get the AQI, the health effects, everything in this regulation. And you should document that training with the name of the trainer, the topic, the date, and who attended. And so if you're missing any of those, that could be a record keeping violation if an inspector said, let me see your written training on this, you know. And you may not have to be written training depending on the size of the employer, but it's always good to protect yourself as an employer by documenting it, because later on you can say, hey, look, I did train you on this.
Nick.
Yes.
Could I add to Carrie's question?
Yeah.
So Carrie, I think the question that you just asked is more related to labor laws. So remember, we're not labor law experts, and there is no option for an employee to work, if they're required a respirator and they don't want to shave. I mean, I don't think that's an option, right? So if you're putting somebody at harm, right, or where they're exposed to something, and they have to have a respirator to protect themselves, right? And we're saying, well, okay, we're gonna allow you to work, but it's okay if you're not shaved. That employee is not being protected. So I don't think that's an option.
Well, I would think that that's like you mentioned, that's a different issue than what we're addressing today, but yeah.
If you're going to have employees working out because it's an emergency at over 500 AQI and they're going to be wearing respiratory protection, then they need to be clean shaven, they need to be fit tested, and they need to be medically cleared to wear that respirator. But up until then, they need to be voluntary supplied, given an N95 or some kind of adequate NIOSH approved respirator to protect them. And but the regulation does not go into specifics requiring that.
Yeah. So for volunteer usage, it doesn't require that the employee be medically cleared by the employer, but should they? Would you recommend that they get medically cleared by their own doctor?
I mean, in the previous slide, yeah. I mean, if they have any history of heart or lung problems, certainly, because that might prevent them from wearing a respirator, and because the respirator is taxing on the body and can cause its own problems. So you want to mitigate those problems by not putting them in harm's way by either putting them out into horrible, smoke-filled air, or putting them in a respirator, which also is going to, possibly harm them. And so then you would have to act appropriately and put them in clean air and change your work practices or do something, but not, you got to weigh these things out, and people need to be informed. The employee needs to be informed about how to use the respirator and the limitations and the benefits. And if that's clearly explained to them, that might inspire them to shave or, wear it in a certain way.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and there are a lot of other questions, but we're going to do that a little bit later. We'll address those.
Okay. So wearing it properly, tight seal, and you can't get a tight seal with facial hair like this. But you also can't get a tight seal by having these hooks around the ears, like masks people are wearing. It has to be around the back of the head at the top. And I see people all the time, they wear the straps incorrectly. And so like it's pulling, they have it both on their neck or both on the top. You want to have it pulling precisely in the right spots on your face so you get a good seal. You need proper donning and doffing. There's like videos I've seen, on how to do this. Over the nose, under the chin. Everyone knows that now with COVID, how to properly wear, a respirator. And the form fit the metal nose piece. So the metal nose piece, like this respirator, this N95 I have here, it came flattened out. It was like pinched. So what I had to do was I first flattened it all out so it's nice and smooth, and then I bent it to the shape of my nose, and approximately, and then I put it on and then shaped it even more. So I had a really good seal, because the most likely event where you're going to get leakage is right from the nose bridge and right under the chin, onto the sides of the chin. So those are the crucial things that people need to know to wear it correctly. And do a seal check as instructed. And it's a little bit more difficult in an N95 than it is half face elastomeric. And the replace if damaged or dirty, and that happens really easy with these N95s. They get dirty really quick, and they become disfigured, deformed really easy. They become uncomfortable to wear. So that's why you should have plenty of them on hand. And also seek medical help if difficulty breathing, dyspnea, shortness of breath, dizziness, nausea. I know from just wearing a mask, I was giving a speech once, and I had a mask on, and I was, hold on, let me catch my breath, because I was suffering. Even though I was fit to even wear a respirator, I was having difficulty breathing through my mask giving a speech. So all those things should be taken into account. And I think that takes us almost to the end here. Do we have time for the video and then some questions?
Yes.
Yes,
I'll
we
go
do.
ahead.
In California, wildfire smoke can have an impact on work sites across the state. Cal OSHA requires employers to protect workers when the air is unhealthy due to wildfire smoke. In this training, we will discuss wildfire smoke hazards and present an overview of what California workers need to know about employers' requirements to protect them. Wildfire smoke contains many hazardous chemicals, but the main harmful pollutant for people who are not close to the fire is particulate matter, tiny liquid and solid particles suspended in the air. The tiniest airborne particulate matter are called PM 2.5 because they are 2.5 micrometers in diameter or smaller. To put that in perspective, the average human hair is about 70 micrometers in diameter. That's about 30 times bigger than these fine particles from wildfire smoke. PM 2.5 particles and droplets stay in the air longer and are usually the most harmful. They can get into your lungs and even be absorbed into the bloodstream. They can irritate the lungs and cause persistent coughing, phlegm, wheezing, or difficulty breathing. They can also cause more serious problems such as reduced lung function, bronchitis, worsening of asthma, and heart failure. Cal OSHA has a regulation to protect workers from wildfire smoke. Title 8, Section 5141.1. Workers are not covered under this regulation if they work in a structure or vehicle where the air is filtered through a mechanical ventilation system and the employer ensures that windows and doors are kept closed, except when it's necessary to open doors to enter or exit. Read the regulation for more types of workers who are not covered. The link is below the video. The regulation requires employers to protect their workers from the effects of wildfire smoke when the employer should reasonably anticipate that employees may be exposed to wildfire smoke and the current air quality index, or AQI, for PM 2.5 is 151 or higher. The current AQI is a measurement used by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, to inform people how polluted the air is. Various pollutants, such as ozone and carbon monoxide, also have an AQI, but the only one used in the Cal OSHA regulation is the one for PM 2.5. The current AQI for PM 2.5 is divided into 6 categories, as shown in this table. If the AQI is 151 or higher, air quality is considered unhealthy for everyone. Over 300 is considered hazardous. Various government agencies monitor the air at locations throughout California and report the current AQI for those places. To determine the current AQI at or near your workplace, you can go to the EPA webpage, airnow.gov, where you can type in your location and it will tell you the current AQI and the forecasted AQI. You can also obtain this information from the web pages of the U.S. Forest Service, the Interagency Wildland Fire Air Quality Response Program, the California Air Resources Board, the local Air Pollution Control District, or the local Air Quality Management District. If you are able to access the EPA website, enviroflash.info, you can sign up to receive daily and forecasted AQIs by text or email for particular cities or zip codes. You can also contact your employer for the current AQI. They are required to check the current AQI at the start of each shift and periodically after, and to inform employees. Links to these web pages are below this video. Employers can also determine the current AQI for PM 2.5 at their workplace by taking measurements with a direct reading instrument and using the table in Appendix A of the Cal OSHA standard to convert the readings to a current AQI. If the current AQI is 151 or higher, then the employer must reduce employee exposure to PM 2.5. They have several options, but they have to start by seeing if they can move the work indoors or into a vehicle where the air is filtered. If they can't, then they must try to move the work to a location where the current AQI is lower, change work schedules, reduce work intensity, or provide more rest periods. If your employer takes all of these measures, but you are still working in air with an AQI of 151 or higher, then your employer must provide respirators certified by the National Institute NIOSH. Respirators can provide effective protection from wildfire smoke, but they must be the kind that filter particles, such as an N95 or P100 Filtering Phase respirator. See Cal OSHA's Respiratory Protection Standard, Section 5144, for what employers are required to do if any of their workers use respirators. If the current AQI is from 151 to 500, then employers must provide NIOSH certified respirators to all employees for voluntary use. People who have a heart or lung problem should ask their healthcare provider before using a respirator. If the current AQI is more than 500, then employers must provide respirators and everyone must use them, except workers conducting emergency or rescue operations. When respirator use is required, your employer must protect you under their respiratory protection program, including medical evaluations and testing. Remember that respirators can protect you, but only if they are selected, worn, and taken care of properly. To wear a filtering face piece respirator properly, such as an N95 mask, follow the manufacturer's instructions. Typically, you place the top strap near the top of your head and the bottom strap below your ears. Check the face seal and tighten the nose clip so that the mask feels snug on your face and you don't have any gaps around the edges. Gaps will let the tiny wildfire smoke particles get inside the respirator. If you're required to use a respirator, you must also shave any facial hair that could interfere with a good seal. And don't wear the straps over a hat, glasses, or hood, because those will also prevent a tight seal. When not wearing your respirator, like when you're eating lunch, store it so it doesn't get dirty. Otherwise, the respirator itself could become a hazard. Also, these types of respirators only provide protection against particles and only up to a certain concentration of particles in the air. They do not protect you from toxic gases and vapors, and they do not protect you in a low oxygen atmosphere. Your employer must train you on proper respirator use, including limitations such as these and the other information listed in Appendix B of the Wildfire Smoke Regulation. Also, remember that a cloth face covering, such as those worn to prevent the spread of COVID-19, is not a respirator, and neither are surgical masks, bandanas, and scarves. None of these will adequately protect you from wildfire smoke. Your employer needs to communicate with you and provide you with training and instruction so that you understand what they are doing to protect you from exposure to wildfire smoke. This needs to include the information contained in Appendix B of the Cal OSHA regulation. Your employer is also required to encourage you to inform them if you notice the air quality getting worse, or if you start having symptoms that may be due to wildfire smoke, such as asthma attacks, difficulty breathing, or chest pain. For more information about how to protect yourself from wildfire smoke hazards, click the links to Cal OSHA web pages and fact sheets below the video. If you feel signs or symptoms of wildfire smoke exposure at work, you have the right to seek medical attention without your employer retaliating against you. Remember, you have a right to stay safe and healthy on the job.
So what we have here is the Cal OSHA resources. This is the list of vendors we were talking about earlier. There's like 35 on there. You should be able to find any kind of N95 respirator on there. And then there's also additional information on building ventilation systems. And you just watched, actually, there's a different video on the use of N95 respirators. So I would recommend that. And contact information. This is mine. My office at 1515 Clay Street, Suite 1103. You can give us a call at the number if you have any questions. We're taking messages because we're sporadic. You know, everyone still has a skeleton crew because of COVID. So we will get back to you and answer your questions with my crew of expert consultants. And that's the rest of the other people too, who also can, you can inquire on their program, you know, especially through the OSHA Training Institute.
Okay, I think we're ready to go over some questions now. Can you go to the next slide, please? Wonderful. Okay. There were a lot of questions about that video. The video is available for use on the Cal OSHA website. We are dropping the PDF into the chat now, and you will have this recording available to you on the websites of the Dominguez Hills, who was hosting the event. However, the recording link will also be on each of the other ed centers, available for use and access on their YouTube pages after 2 weeks' time. So going over questions, I'm going to go back a little bit. Alexander Aguiano asked, when CAL FIRE, the Forestry Department, and the National Guard have a setup to combat a fire, what OSHA entity would be involved?
Well, if it's a California employees, it would be Cal OSHA, and say if it's the National Guard, it would be Fed OSHA. That's a different jurisdiction because they're federal employees.
Okay, hopefully that answered Alexander's questions. Carrie asked, is it possible for you to provide an HVAC inspection list that Cal OSHA uses?
No, I don't. I mentioned that because that's what I used to enforce, and I would be looking for their maintenance records, but there is no list that I know of.
Okay. Andrew Kirby wants to know, he says that he's had issues with the airnow.gov recently in the Sacramento region. It hasn't been updating properly. Do you have other sites, or is there a phone app that their solar construction team can use out in the field?
Well, there's a number of different websites that we put there before: the U.S. Forest Service Wildland Air Quality Response Program, and the California Air Resources Board website. It's not limited to the AirNow. I mean, there's ones that are local that might actually provide, more accurate, current information on the AQI. So it depends on what your needs are.
So I actually searched my apps for local AQ, air quality management districts and so forth. So that might be something that would help you. Kevin, related to the exception statement, engaged in wildland firefighting, does this include those involved in operations related to the fire incident, for instance, support of the incident, or does this mean purely those in suppression activities?
I don't know. Specifically, I would say if you're going to hold to the letter of the law here, is like those doing the firefighting and not the support personnel are exempted. But I don't know for certain, but that would be my reasoned assumption.
Okay. At the AQ of 500, wouldn't it be better to send your employees home in the event that you don't have enough respirators?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's the changing conditions definitely need to be monitored. And I think keeping people, it has to be it should be an emergency situation if you're going to put your employees out there at an AQI over 500, because then you need to have them in respirators and a respiratory protection program. And it has to be pretty serious. I mean, and you would have to plan ahead to be ready for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Otherwise, send them home,
Yeah. Loretta's asking, again, she's got some clarification on the Appendix D signature. She's wondering, is it a one-time requirement or is it required annually?
I know it's at least the time you give them, when they request a voluntary respirator. I'd have to look at the regulation. I don't know.
Okay, Loretta, I hope that answered your question. Let's see, could you better delineate between the wildfire standard and the respiratory protection program standard? For example, should or shall perform fit testing if there are any requirements. And that's from Anonymous.
Well, the wildfire, the wildfire standard is just about getting people protected and monitoring the weather, getting communication, making sure people are trained, and offering them N95s or other respiratory protection when it's necessary. And the respiratory protection standard is a huge standard. So you got to look at that. That's like a 3-day class. I mean, not just a lunchtime.
Or 4 days in our case.
How many?
Each of the ed centers, it is an OSHA numbered course. So we do offer that course, and it's 4 days.
4 days. 4 days.
Yeah.
With the respiratory protection standards. So it's pretty serious. So if you're going to go that route, you should call OTI and take the 4-day class and go from there.
Thank you. Kiyoshi asks, well, first of all, he states, Nick, thank you for the presentation. And then he says, in reference to Title 8 CCR 5141.1, this was originally described as a placeholder permanent regulation. Is there still a plan to revise the permanent regulation? And if so, what elements will be changed?
Oh, I can't speculate. I don't have a crystal ball in front of me. basically, Cal OSHA regulations are changing all the time. When a need is shown that like things need to be revised, we have new information, like say the heat illness prevention standard was promulgated, a lot, like a decade ago. And over the course of the years, there was like things that didn't need to be there. There were other things that were essential to be put in there. And there was all sorts of needs that were identified over the course of a couple of years. And then they revised the standard to make it better for employers, better for protection for the employees. And so these regulations are not written in stone. This regulation may be modified in the next couple of years to better protect employees and make it easier for employers to use.
Okay, thank you. Anonymous says, do you know if Cal OSHA is going to be developing a template wildfire smoke prevention policy in the future?
I don't know.
No crystal ball.
No
Again,
crystal ball.
yeah, if only we had it, huh?
Sometimes I know these things, but like I don't know.
Okay. Can the video be used to fulfill the training requirement regarding the standard?
I would say no. I mean, you can use it as an adjunct, as we are using it right now, but you really want to sit your employees down and explain to them, and I went into way more detail during this presentation about the health effects, because I think that's really important, the why you want to protect yourself. I think if people understand the hazards of the smoke, then they're much more likely to take it upon themselves to really think about it and to want to protect themselves in the case of one of these wildfire crises.
Okay, let's see here. Okay, Daniel, the following. These are more like statements. So, and then Rob is asking, this is our last question, Nick.
Okay.
It seems like there were some shall should nuances between sections 5141.1 for wildfire and for respiratory protection 5144.
Yep.
What are those?
I already went through that. I mean, in the respiratory protection standard, those are all shalls, without a doubt.
Okay.
In this standard, it's should. And so I would recommend everyone, if you can, get your employees medically cleared, get them fit tested. But in the crisis of a wildfire and people are working outside, that's not feasible. You can't send, 200,000 employees to the clinic and have them be cleared by a doctor to wear respirators. It's just not going to happen. So, definitely if they are going to be required to wear respiratory protection, get your respiratory protection program operating and make sure everyone's medically cleared and fit tested and shaved clean.
Great. And then one more statement and just a confirmation. So basically, for voluntary use of a respirator, an employee still should be medically cleared, but it's not the responsibility of the employer.
Wait.
For voluntary use.
Right.
So they're just saying to confirm, for voluntary use of a respirator, an employee should still be medically cleared, but it's not the responsibility of the employer to make sure that happens.
Well, I mean, in the regulation, it's basically if you do have heart and lung problems, which is the major deal when you're wearing respiratory protection, because it takes pleural pressure and interthoracic pressure and you're sucking some of your own carbon dioxide. So if you have heart and lung problems, and you should really communicate to your employees so they understand, because they may have a pre-existing condition that they haven't told you about. You don't know their medical history. So you would want you to communicate that to your employees so they can take that knowledge if they have heart problems or lung problems and say, I can't wear a respirator. Can we do something else to basically work it out?
Okay. And that is all the questions for now, Nick.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Yeah, just so you know, I mean, my number's right there. You can call our office line if you have any further questions. We have offices all over the state of California too. You can go on our website and find your local office and give them a call. They have duty consultants basically, and that's what we do. We answer people's questions. We appreciate employers trying to do their best to protect their employees. You want to stay away from enforcement. They're there to bust you, but consultation's here to help you.
Thank you, Nick. We really
Absolutely.
appreciate the information you gave out today. We also want to thank everyone that participated in today's event. It's through awareness and prevention that we can protect our communities, prevent worker injuries, and ultimately save lives. We hope that the resources that we've provided, like this web talk and the previous webinar that we did, will continue to provide value to all of us in Region 9. Please feel free to reach out to any of our hosts today if we can answer any of your questions, or if you have future ideas for lunchtime webinars similar to this. You'll see our contact information there on the screen in front of you, and we hope you all have a great and safe rest of your day.
Anissa, I don't see the PDF. Did anyone?
It was sent earlier. It's in the chat
Okay.
earlier.
Would you mind putting it one more time for there's
Sure.
some folks that are saying they did not receive it.
It'll take just a second.
And for those of you who registered for the webinar, and we have your email information, we can also send you the PDF, but this is the best place to get it, is in the chat. So
And there should be a follow-up survey that should be coming right after at the end of the session. So just give us a little bit of feedback and let us know how we can help for future webinars. And we appreciate you attending today. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you, Nick.
Bye, folks. Thank you.
And panelists, if you can stay on for just a second.